Ready? All right. We're going to wrap up with the Roaring Twenties, which is quite a bit happier than 65 million people dead in 4 years between the Spanish flu and World War One. Still some controversial things going on, but we'll get into, at this point, the prosperity for the U.S. during the chaos of 1918, 1919, and the ending of World War I. You have the Spanish influenza, but now in the early part of the 20s, all the way through 1929, you're going to really kind of bounce back. And you have the great stock market crash that's going to end up happening at the end of the 20s that's going to really affect the 30s, but that's kind of a topic for a different day. So during the Roaring Twenties, business is going to prosper like never before. A new Republican administration, that would be Harding and Coolidge, seek to return to conservative values. And we'll talk about that, whether that was kind of successful in a couple different cases. But you see the start of the modern era in terms of like mass culture, which we've talked about before. But now we're really going to see that expand even further. And to a different level that our lives today, it's going to look a lot more similar to life today. Things that people are interested in and stuff like that. Farmers have it even tougher after the bounce back after World War I, because during World War I, if you remember that slide, that the prices for farm goods went way up. Well, now that World War I is over, those prices are going to come back down. And so they're going to be back producing the same amount of food, but there's going to be far less demand for that food. And so when you have way too much supply and not enough demand, your prices are going to plummet. And so they're going to be hit pretty hard, but economically, the rest of America is going to be doing pretty well until 1929, when we see the Great Depression set in. There is a brief recession in 1922. While you're trying to convert your economy back to a peacetime economy, every single person isn't working and building and selling and the government buying everything. So you do have a little bit of a dip. But I would say from 23 to 29, you have a major economic surge. The gross national product of the United States increases from $70 billion in 1923 to over $222 billion in 1929. So you're talking about, a huge growth in a very short period of like 7 years. Stock prices are going to soar. Ultimately now, though, we know that that's going to create a bubble, which when we get to the stock market crash, I'll explain how stocks really kind of work, which is kind of an interesting conversation if you don't really know how that works or why the stock market crashed. Some of that stuff is really, really interesting. But things are going pretty well. Consumer-oriented economy at this point means exactly what you think. Most of the economics are going to be based on these consumer products. Like, y'all even know what this is right here?
That's a butter maker.
A butter maker? No. No, this is a washing machine. A clothes washing machine. Yeah. Clearly a stove, right? Stove right here. What about this one? That's an ice box, refrigerator. Black & Decker, right? Electric tools during this time. Telephone. Y'all know what that one is? Can you really see it? It looks like a bug zapper, but it's a toaster. Waffle iron. It's maybe a blender? A scale? I don't know, to be honest with you. And then you have like an electric iron, right? Vacuum cleaners are going to replace brooms. Supermarkets replace, farm to market kind of things. Going to have big box stores kind of start showing up, like Macy's and some of these big department stores like JCPenney, stuff like that. Like, these are all going to start showing up and mass producing. One of the biggest ones at the time was a company called Sears and Roebuck. And they would send out an annual booklet, and it was this thick, and you could buy anything in Sears and Roebuck catalog. I mean, you could order it and they'd ship it to you in the mail, including a house. You could buy houses. Yeah, you could buy houses in Sears and Roebuck, and you looked through the book and like, oh, look, this house is so pretty. It's wonderful. And then you'd order it from Sears and Roebuck. You'd put in an order. You'd be like, and you'd send them the money in an envelope. And then on a train, they would send you every piece of wood and every nail and everything that you would need to build your house. And then you and your friends would just build your house.
Wait, what's that furniture place that kind of does something like
IKEA? Yeah, it was like IKEA for a home. It was crazy. So yeah, mass society, a lot of this would target women, which makes common sense because even though women had gotten more rights, they were still the prime fixtures of the home. So who's doing all the cooking? Who's doing all the cleaning? Women. Who run the world? Girls. All right? And so all the baking supplies, all these things were very much, directed towards women, and it made everybody in the middle class kind of look the same. Radio is a big part of this. Radio becomes major in connecting people like never before and providing entertainment like never before. By the end of the 1920s, about 14 million families own a radio. There was major networks, pretty much. There was three major networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC. That was it. You had three radio stations that were all around the country, and then you had local radio stations. And so 1926, you see NBC created. 1928, Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS. They spread radio. You have the first comedy hours like Amos and Andy in 1928. You go to weekly, people would go and see like black and white movies, but mostly people were entertained in their homes. And people would sit around, and it created this mass culture because everybody, when there's only three stations, everybody that's listening to the radio is listening to the same things. So you have these shows that the whole country would listen to. And then they'd go to work and talk about it. And it became this thing where it's like, hey, did you listen to the radio last night? And everybody's like, yeah, we sat and listened to the radio. It was great. Ha ha, that was funny. Ha ha, yeah. Sports becomes a big part of this as well. You have major technologies that make mundane tasks a lot easier. Like here you end up with like milking machines and stuff like that. But here you see this guy, he's milking a cow and listening to the radio with his headphones. Before he just had to go out there and milk old Betsy and she'd just sit there and moo and he'd talk to her. And now he can listen to the radio while he milks the cow, right? So there you go. Indebtedness increases greatly because people start buying things on credit, which they don't have, and because they want the new vacuum cleaner and they want the new stove, and so there is some negative stuff. There is a sense of sameness that gets created. All the cars look the same. Everybody listens to the same radio shows. Everybody goes to the same movies. There's also a major environmental impact because we have an increased reliance on fossil fuels, right? 1916, the U.S. produces 50 million barrels of oil. 1929, 435 million barrels of oil. Yeah, a lot more. Electric needs are going crazy, so we have to burn more coal to power all the electricity. And so you're going to have, new roads are going to be constructed, connecting the world like never before since everybody has a car now. Women go through a major change. You have the 19th Amendment, 1920, women get the right to vote. Young women start kind of rebelling against that old Victorian era. We're coming out of that where women have to be this, rigid gender roles. You end up with these kind of young women who want to step out and be new, and they kind of get this term flapper. A flapper. Yeah, that's like the woman who kind of is rebelling against the general norms, right? And she'd have bobbed hair and a short skirt and, smoking cigarettes and people, women smoking cigarettes. People are like, women, a woman smoking a cigarette? Yeah, and they'd be like, yeah, you mean my freedom torch? Because, women weren't allowed to smoke in public. Only men were. And then, so women were like, I'm smoking, I don't care. And so that was one way to, push back against it. Some of them would even, drink out in the open, women drinking, oh my gosh. And then they'd go and talk about their sexuality, and women and people were like, oh my gosh. They'd go to dance clubs. So there's definitely this major generation gap that is coming about that is going to be even more put in place by all of these new technologies and growth within that. So women are really going to be a big part of that. You have the 18th Amendment with prohibition, where they literally just say no more alcohol, which is incredibly stupid. Nothing that America has ever tried to put a prohibition on has ever worked, ever. There's nothing in which the United States government had says, you can't do that. And that people were like, oh, well, if the government says I can't do it, I guess I'll stop. Like, that doesn't work. Most of the time it makes it worse, and in this case it definitely made it worse. People did not stop drinking. They just started drinking like things that killed them and made them go blind, because like, they'd be like, oh, I can't drink beer, I'll just drink some paint thinner. For real, I'm not lying. People were drinking like rubbing alcohol and getting extremely sick. Like, yeah, it was bad. It also gives rise to organized crime. And that's going to be crazy, like Al Capone here, Scarface here. In 1 year alone, he made $60 million on alcohol sales when alcohol was illegal. Yeah, that's a couple $100 million today in a year. And so that's going to really bring about crime, and it makes him public enemy number one. They eventually arrest him and throw him in jail for tax evasion. Then you have, this is the last little bit here. The other thing you have is fundamentalism that comes about as a reaction to this push for new progressive ideas and women all over the place smoking and drinking and voting, right? Oh, the humanity. Very conservative Christians are really going to push back against that, and you end up with fundamentalism. People that come out and say, hey, you know, like, we believe in the literal version of the Bible, 7-day creation. They reject evolutionary theory. And it becomes a very strong movement. And, you know, it becomes to be where you have religious people, and then you have these people that are trying to make their new kind of society, and that's going to come to a head in the next several years as you go through the 1920s and 30s and 40s and 50s. Fundamentalism really is the strongest in the South and in the West, but it's very much a national movement. And then you have things like this, where you had the state of Tennessee versus the John Thomas Scopes, which is the Scopes monkey trial, where the dude teaches evolution, and the state of Tennessee says you can't do that, and they take it to the Supreme Court, and actually they rule against him at first, and then they come back and say, no, you're wrong, he can do that, it's freedom, you know, speech and all this stuff, and you know, they actually fine him like $100 for teaching about evolution during this, which is really interesting. And so it becomes this fundamentalism idea of trying to maintain conservatism during the 20s and 30s and moving forward is a major issue that they're going to have to deal with. And that's, you know, the Scopes monkey trial. Just going through this, I'm not talking about all this because anti-evolution. Yeah, you have talkies, you have radio, you have you know, Charlie Chaplin, you have different things that are bringing people together. You have Mary Pickford, she's like America's sweetheart, and jazz comes about. The movies, you have people start to, you know, go and watch movies, and it becomes a situation where everybody is coming together, and we have a mass culture again. This is just kind of showing you, like, through the 1920s, how society is changing. Sports increases, very popular, baseball. Guys like Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, what a racist. So racist. Terrible human being. What do you mean, how? Go look up, because they have video, bro, and like they wrote down, like, yeah, he's a terrible racist. Jazz shows up. You have Duke Ellington and the Harlem Renaissance, where you have black culture really developing in new ways. Jazz opens up freedoms of sexuality and materialism and self-absorption and casual disregard for all the uppity rigidity of the Victorian era. Sinclair Lewis, you have, you have Main Street, and F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby looks at, what is the emptiness and the smugness and barrenness of these people who are celebrated as being the great, engineers and great innovators of the 1920s, and what is all of this really bringing them, right? And pointing some of this stuff out. Ernest Hemingway and The Lost Generation. Group of people that say, we're disillusioned with what America is now. And we're going to go to Europe, and we're going to kind of go be writers over there and experience that, a more calm lifestyle. This is too much for us. And that's the end.